We often recall the adage, with great power comes great responsibility, which suggests that those with significant influence have a duty to use it wisely. Unfortunately, it appears that global superpowers and their organizations have disregarded this principle, including the United Nations. Criticism has been directed at the UN for its handling of recent international conflicts, indicating that it has failed to uphold this fundamental principle. Hi and welcome to a new episode of The Global Game with me, Vedika. Let's begin.
To
get a first payment on the next check.
Hello and welcome to TFIGlobal, the foreign affairs and geopolitical. The UN, the self-proclaimed guardian of the whole world, which claims to be fighting for international peace and security, has endured a humiliating defeat in the backdrop of the Russo-Ukraine conflict. The mechanisms of the US-backed UN have faced the unbreakable wall of Putin's Russia. The United Nations is an intergovernmental organization founded in 1945 to promote international cooperation and to create and maintain international order. With headquarters in New York City, the UN currently has 193 member states. The UN is made up of 6 main organs: the General Assembly, the Security Council, the Economic and Social Council, the International Court of Justice, the Secretariat, and the Trusteeship Council, which has suspended its operations since 1990s. Each organ has specific responsibilities within the UN's overall mission. One of the most important functions of the UN is to maintain international peace and security. The Security Council is responsible for this and has the power to impose sanctions and authorize the use of force in order to maintain peace. The General Assembly, which is made up of representatives from all member states, is responsible for discussing and making recommendations on international issues and can also approve the UN's budget. Overall, it can be said that the UN is a critical international organization that plays a vital role in promoting global cooperation. However, the reality is entirely different. Unfortunately, the UN is a body whose primary objective since its inception has been to advocate, promote, and attain the questionable agenda of the United States. Before the formation of the UN, the League of Nations existed, whose functions were completely identical to that of the UN. Meaning, the League of Nations' main purpose was also centered around furthering the authoritative and illegitimate ploy of Washington. In fact, former US President Woodrow Wilson himself was behind the creation of the League of Nations. He very cunningly disguised the international body as a forum of political dialogue and diplomatic negotiations. However, in reality, the League of Nations was running a charade in the name of promotion of peace and security. In the early 20th century, the US devised a strategy to intimidate other sovereign and peaceful countries through the brazen display of its nuclear weapons. Unfortunately, most countries, particularly those which emerged from the dark shadows of colonial dominance, were compelled to embrace the new colonial agenda of the US. After managing to bring these countries under the wings of its hegemony, the US realized that the formation of a sophisticated international body which will look after its interests is indispensable for the geopolitical success of its nefarious intentions. That's where the role of the United Nations comes in. The institution, or let's call it an extension of the US government, has time and again come to the defense of Washington whenever it has found itself in the self-created bleak manhole of geopolitical blunders. Instead of upholding its obligations, which are enshrined in the Charter, the UN has not only turned a blind eye to the systematic atrocities and countless brutalities of the US, but also provided Washington material and financial support. Since Russia has always been the chief adversary of the US, Washington has often deployed the UN in its flawed mission to bring the economic, diplomatic, and political downfall of Russia. Even before the initiation of Moscow's military operation in Ukraine, the UN was used by the US to target Russia, but the West's diplomatic and military aggressions on Moscow through the UN have significantly risen in the aftermath of Russo-Ukraine conflict. So what were these measures taken by the UN against Russia? Let's trace the year 2022 in that regard. On 28 February, the prosecutor of the West dominated International Criminal Court launched an investigation against Russia for war crimes and human rights abuses. On 2 March, the UN General Assembly passed a resolution condemning Russia's military operation in Ukraine with 141 votes in favor, 5 against, and 35 abstentions. On 5 March, the UN Human Rights Council formed an independent international commission of inquiry against Russia. On 7 April, the UN General Assembly passed a resolution and demanded Russia's removal from the Human Rights Council. The resolution managed to garner 93 votes in favor and 24 against. On 6 June, Pramila Patten, who was the Secretary General's Special Representative for Sexual Violence in Armed Conflict, accused Russian forces of committing sexual assault and rape against Ukrainian civilians. On 10 June, the UN Human Rights Office questioned the legality of the sentence given to 3 foreign fighters in Ukraine by a court in the Russian-controlled territory of Donetsk. On 21 June, the UN Special Advisor on the Prevention of Genocide, Varimo Deritu, accused Russian military of perpetrating sexual violence and human trafficking in Ukraine. On 9 September, the heads of the UN Human Rights Monitoring Mission in Ukraine stated that about 5,800 civilians have been killed and held Russia responsible for their deaths. On 29 September, the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres labeled Russia's plan to gain control of Donetsk, Kherson, Luhansk, and Zaporizhia territories as illegal and called on the world to condemn it. On 12 October, the UN General Assembly adopted a resolution which called on nations to not recognize the 4 annexed regions of Ukraine in the wake of referendums held in September. On 14 November, the UN General Assembly passed a resolution which called on Russia to pay war reparations to Ukraine. 94 nations voted in favor of it and 14 against. On 4 December, the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, Volker Turk, visited Ukraine as part of a 4-day official trip. While visiting Kharkiv, Izium, and Uzhhorod, Turk blamed Russia for the widespread devastation and destruction. Apart from diplomatic and political backing, the UN also provided significant financial assistance to Ukraine. On 1 March, the UN gave an aid of $1.7 billion to Ukraine in the name of humanitarian relief. On 26 April, the UN increased its funding to Kyiv, providing an aid of $2.24 billion to Zelensky. Similarly, on 25 October, during an international summit in Berlin, organized by Germany and the European Union, the European Investment Bank and the UN Development Programme signed a €2 million deal with Ukraine. On 4 January 2023, the UN announced a further $15.5 million funds to Ukraine. This time, it was intended to help its farmers. However, despite all these diplomatic, economic, and political measures of the West, which were intended to prevent Russia from gaining territorial success in Ukraine, achieve economic advancement, and cause its international isolation in the geopolitical arena, Moscow's rise has been significantly persistent. The West rallied around the world with the help of its treacherous body UN against Russia, while the US and Europe created a false perception of Vladimir Putin on the global stage. Bodies like the UN used their resources to attain the ulterior motives of Biden, Macron, Leyen, and their lackeys. The West tried every method at their disposal to cause the downfall of Russia, from imposing draconian sanctions on Moscow to the adoption of illegitimate resolutions and meaningless votes. But so far, the West has been unable to break the determination of Moscow to safeguard its sovereignty and territorial integrity from the terroristic onslaughts of Ukraine. It must be noted that the West used the UN as a tool in order to give legitimacy to its authoritative measures on Russia. But the reality is that Russia is making tremendous gains in Ukraine, and Zelensky is coming to his senses that it was a mistake to trust Biden and Leyen. Therefore, the legitimacy of Putin's actions have defeated the malicious intentions of the UN. The flawed body of the West has died in the face of Russia's willpower.